I want to start by asking you about your training and sort of the musical lineage you come from with your teachers. I know you studied in Wales before you came to America, so
Yeah.
where did it all start for you?
Well, I started as a child when I was 6 years old in Wales, and the principal or headmaster of the school that I was at was a classical guitarist. So I started studying with him and started playing classical guitar. I don't think I specifically wanted to play classical guitar, I just wanted to play guitar. Studied with him for a couple of years, and then he had his teacher come to the school to give me and one other student lessons. And then at the age of 10, I went to a boarding school which had a very strong music component or department. And unbeknownst to me or my parents, actually had a fantastic guitar teacher, a guy called Jonathan Baker, who was a student of Jose Tomas in Alicante, was a contemporary and good friend of David Russell. So he was a very important teacher for me. I actually, embarrassingly, don't remember a great deal of what he taught me, but I remember very fondly of having lessons with him and his personality and his attitude towards music and the guitar, and that was an important time for me. It made the guitar a much more significant part of my life rather than just something I did. I guess I identified myself as a classical guitarist. So I was at that school till about 16, and then I moved home, and my parents were living in Somerset by then, and there was a very, very good teacher who happened to live in the village where my parents lived. She'd been at the Royal Academy, was a student of Julian Bream, also a very good friend of David Russell, ironically, coincidentally. Studied with her for 3 or 4 years. But at that point, classical guitar was a big part of my life, but I was not a particularly serious or very hardworking student. Certainly not as hard as I could and perhaps should have worked. I started teaching in my last year of high school at the suggestion of another teacher at the school I was attending. I started teaching an after-school kids program and enjoyed that. When I left school, I didn't have any clear plans of what my career might be. I really hadn't considered music to be a career option at that point. But I started teaching full-time. I'd made some connections through this after-school program. So I started teaching in schools and some sort of community colleges in the counties where I lived. At that point, I became much more serious about my own study, worked much harder, practiced much more, so I was in that role for almost 5 years. At which point, I met an American in England, decided to get married, moved to America, which I did, and then actually gave up playing. Didn't play for about a year and a half.
Oh, wow. So your move had nothing to do with guitar at all?
No, nothing at all.
And you moved in 91, right?
Moved in 91.
Okay.
And a lot of the teaching I'd been doing, I've been teaching a lot of young kids, which I'm not particularly good at, and also teaching some sort of general folk blues guitar, which I'm also not very good at. So my teaching work was not particularly fulfilling. I wasn't really working very hard at my own playing.
Were you performing much, or?
No. Well, I mean, I was performing gigs and things, but I certainly wasn't concertizing. I hadn't done any of that kind of playing at that point. Mm-hmm. So I think I was, just a little bit burned out. I decided to get married, made this move to America. It just seemed like I needed to change a lot of things. So I stopped playing. After about a year and a half, I started to miss it. So I started taking lessons again and studied with Gary Basiri, who had been part of a duo, Novacek-Basiri duo, who'd moved up to Seattle from LA. They graduated from Northridge, I think, moved to Seattle in the 70s. They were a professional working duo, very good. And studying with Gary, he was a very positive, very encouraging teacher, great influence, I think, for me musically. And he made it seem a very legitimate possibility that I could have a life with music as a career. My teachers in England had been very good, but Jonathan and Wendy had not played professionally, so I don't think...
There wasn't really a model for you there, I guess.
Right, and they didn't push me towards that as a possibility either. I mean, no, I don't hold that against them or anything, but you know, Gary was much more sort of positive and, you know, sure, just go ahead and do it. And I had applied to the University of Washington to do a degree in English, thinking that I was going to become a lawyer. Gary encouraged me to do music scholarship auditions, so I did that. They offered me a music scholarship, so I did music and studied with Stephen Novacek there. And at that point, you know, I was 25 or 26 by the time I went to the UW. I was much more serious about it. I was, you know, I'd come back to it having had a break, and took it very seriously. Decided, you know, I'm going to do this degree. This is an opportunity for me to really, really take music seriously, see how far I can actually push myself. So I was a very serious, very diligent student at that time. Took a lot of master classes. You know, really, really tried to absorb as much as possible. I played for David Russell several times, played for Eduardo Fernandez a couple of times. Eduardo, I feel, is perhaps the most significant teacher I've had. He had a very profound effect on me just in those two interactions. Some other great classics, Oscar Gilia, Elliot Fisk, you know, a bunch of people that were, you know, enormously helpful and inspiring. So I've had a lot of very, very good teachers. I would not want to ascribe myself, my current way, to anyone in particular. I mean, I'm grateful to all of them. I wouldn't say that I'm self-taught, but I think a lot of my education has been self-directed. And I've been very lucky to have access to and the opportunity to work with a lot of very, very talented musicians. And I think, you know, they've helped me reach whatever level I've reached.
One of the things I wanted to approach is repertoire, different kinds of repertoire. You play a lot of different music, you've recorded a lot of different music, and sort of building this awareness of musical language or style, you know. So maybe I want to start with one type of music in particular. Where did you first sort of really immerse yourself in 19th century music?
So when I was a student at the University of Washington, I did a competition, did the Northwest Guitar Competition. It was in Seattle, and it was 1995. I'd been at the U for less than a year, and I got second prize, did very well. And evidently it was very close between me and the guy who got first. And I talked to a lot of the jury, and almost all of them said, you know, oh, it was very close, hard to separate the two of you, but he played that big iguana piece, that 19th century repertoire is so impressive. And at that point, I had decided to sort of form a musical identity of only playing 20th century music. This was back in the 20th century.
Right.
I like the idea of only playing contemporary music, or at least, you know, music that had been written in that century. And, you know, the point is that we have a very rich repertoire from that period that draws on classical style and romantic style. And so everything that I played, I wanted to play music that was written for the guitar. I wanted to play music that was written within the last 100 years. So that was sort of what I thought my identity was going to be. And then the suggestion was made that if I wanted to win competitions, I had to play big virtuosic 19th century pieces.
A familiar reason to do something.
Sure. So that was my very poor motivation for going back and looking at music of the 19th century again, you know, so I could show off. And it was in doing that and in studying that music, which I had ignored for, you know, at least 10 years, probably almost 20. It just reawakened me to the richness of repertoire that we have. So I started to really enjoy playing it, and would almost always include something from that era in my repertoire. A few years later down the road, I also started to go back on other sort of artistic decisions I've made. Now we're going to play Baroque music. Maybe I should play some Baroque music.
Yeah, you have some Scarlatti recorded.
Sure. I said I would never play transcriptions, and then I started playing transcriptions. And in doing that, and I don't remember particularly where it started, but I think actually may have started with Piazzolla. I wanted to learn some Piazzolla. I like a lot of South American, Latin American music. I enjoy listening to it. I had not really felt like it was anything that I wanted to play particularly, and it's not music that I identified with culturally as a musician. But I really liked Piazzolla's music, and I thought, okay, to push myself, I'm going to try to learn this music. I'm going to try to understand the style. I'm going to try to learn how to play it really well. So I invested a great deal of time and energy in trying to understand, the right way to play that music. I always make the analogy of music being like language, and if you want to speak a foreign language, you can speak a language fluently, but I really want to speak like a native. And, with language, obviously, it's very, very difficult to do that. And I think with music, it's very, very difficult to do that. But that became my goal. And I then moved to other styles of music and tried to, really immerse myself in performance practices and, cultural aspects of playing the music. Rather than just playing it as me, I tried to become somebody who played that music. If that makes sense.
Or understood that music, yeah.
Yeah, understood it to a higher degree. I mean, I think when we're performing music, it's crucial, really, that we play, from the heart or instinctively. I think if you're very conscious of your interpretation, it's often not compelling for a listener. So we want the interpretation to be, an internal, spontaneous kind of thing. But in order to do that effectively, I think you have to be steeped in that understanding. So, it's kind of a long process, but I think it's a very important and very valuable one. If you play music just like if you speak language like a native, it just makes more sense. And I think that if somebody hears a very well constructed stylistic performance of a piece of music versus a less stylistic approach, I believe they'll find the stylistic approach to be more convincing.
Yeah, they'll notice that. Yeah.
I think so. They may not be able to articulate the differences, but it will just make more sense. So I feel a responsibility to the music and to the audience that's going to listen to it, to try to do the most informed performance of the music that I can.
Makes sense. So just going to some specifics and going back to maybe your original aspirations of the repertoire, playing 20th century music.
Yeah.
I was sort of struck by, and this is something I've thought of before, but especially your second CD of 20th century music, how much of it is English music, right? And I don't know, maybe that was intentional or not. Even the Brouwer Sonata is written for Bream, right? So there's a little bit of a connection there.
Yeah.
So was that intentional? Did you sort of invest a lot in playing music written for English guitarists or written by English composers, or was it kind of happened because that was a lot of the repertoire at the time?
It's probably a happy coincidence. I mean, I think of that era, Bream was responsible for a great deal of really high quality music. I also, one of the things that I had for a while was what I called the Bream test. And if I felt inspired to play a piece of music, I asked myself, would Bream play this? And if I thought that he wouldn't, then I maybe would not play it.
So he was sort of a model for you in a lot of ways.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah.
As he was for many people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I played some music that I'm quite sure Bream would not have played. So it wasn't like I wouldn't do something just because I thought Bream wouldn't do it. But I tried to use that as sort of a benchmark for how good is this piece.
Yeah, it was a consideration.
Yeah, if I'm drawn to a piece for one reason or another, before I invest the time and energy in really learning it, I want to think, okay, is this really going to pay off?
Talking a little bit about commissions, because you also commission music, which seems to be sort of a feature of any performer's life that has to be there to some degree, or is almost always there.
Yeah.
It's also kind of cool to see that you've commissioned quite a bit of music from Stephen Goss, right? At least several pieces.
Two.
I guess two, but
one
large.
of them is big enough that it feels like several pieces.
Yeah, and so you have that connection to your roots in the UK, but also you've been working with Brian Johansson in the Northwest. So are there other composers besides those two that you've really enjoyed working with, or what's your experience been like commissioning that music? And
I've commissioned other pieces from people in the Northwest, Tom Baker, Kevin Callahan, Michael Nicolella.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, I started to do that because, using Bream as a model, you know, he had made an effort to expand the repertoire by commissioning music, and I felt, you know, as a guitarist, this was part of our responsibility to bring new music to the table. And I tried to, initially, the pieces that I commissioned were, actually they've always been from composers that I know, so I have a personal connection to the person, and I like their music. You know, so far I've not commissioned anybody. Well, I did get, somebody wrote me a piece who had not written a guitar piece before, and that didn't turn out so well. So, you know, I'm pretty cagey about the repertoire that I choose, and so I have not commissioned a lot of music, and I've always tried to be as sure as possible that if I enter into that relationship, I'm going to get something out of it that I really want. Mm-hmm. I did also commission somebody to write a piece, a very good friend, and I never played it because I didn't like it. Fortunately, he didn't hold it against me. Everything is fine. Other people have played the piece, which is great. So it depends. Some composers all work in different ways. I particularly like working with Steve Goss because he really values and thinks it's a very important part of the process of the interaction between the composer and the performer. And you know, that's been a very nice connection in the sort of the genesis of the piece, and he's open to suggestions from me as a player. He'll write something, I'll play it, I'll have some feedback. You know, so it really feels like a collaboration. Other people, you know, they write the piece and they give it to you, and that's the piece. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I've even said, you know, hey, you know, how about you do this? No. Oh, could I? No. Yeah. So you know, it's an interesting collaboration, and you know, it can operate on different levels.
Yeah. So, and you actually recorded a whole CD of Brian Johansson's music, the 24 Preludes. What was the experience like doing a CD that was so full of one composer and one type of piece and all that, and them all being new pieces? That you didn't commission them, right?
No, he wrote them. He's an amazingly prolific composer, and you know, he wrote them and sent them out to a bunch of people. And I read through them all, and I'll be honest, I didn't care for some of them right away. They're quite a diverse range of styles. I think, you know, almost everything is kind of identifiably Brian, and I do really like his music, but I read through them and came up with I thought, okay, I'm gonna make a set of these. I'll just pick a handful of them. So I made a list of ones that I liked and went back and forth reading and playing and sort of narrowed it down to a little set of 6. I was playing those in concert, and he heard me play them and came backstage afterwards and was like, dude, you have to record all 24. And I said, dude, I'd love to. You know, and so
nice.
the post-concert excitement, and then it's like, wait, what?
You're committed now.
Exactly. Well, you know, I'm very flattered that he asked me to do it, and I'm really glad that he did, and I'm glad that I agreed, because I really got to know all the pieces, and I actually really, really liked them all. And even the ones that I didn't like initially, you know, I worked on them and got to know them better. It was great. I mean, sometimes I think I have a tendency often to just back away from music for one reason or another. I'll be interested in it, and then I'll get a little way into it, and then decide, you know what, I'm not gonna make the effort for this. I think, you know, that's arguably a weakness of mine, but in the case of the Preludes, you know, I made this commitment, so I just kind of had to suck it up and do it. Mm-hmm.
And you were happy with the product in the end?
I was very excited, yeah. I mean, I really think he sort of conceived of it as a whole piece. I think it works beautifully as a piece, although it's like 48 minutes long.
Yeah, well, I was struck when I got it, because it was probably one of the earlier recordings I bought after my introduction to this whole world of this music, and I was struck at how easy it was to listen through it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Because there's sometimes you hear players record a CD of all one composer's music, and it sort of starts to drag at some point. You're like, what's, you know, nothing new is happening, but that definitely wasn't the experience with those.
No, I think they're very diverse. Something also, I think, I mean, about my recordings, I really try always to really make a performance on the recording. And I think some people struggle with that. You know, there's a desire with a recording, obviously, to play very cleanly. You know, you got to put something out there that's going to be there for posterity. And by wanting to do the best possible job, you're sort of constricted in some way. And, you know, for better or worse, I try not to be that way. And sometimes you buy recordings, particularly if you buy a recording of a single composer. Guitarists often, you know, they play a few pieces by a composer and they play them fantastically well. And then, I'll learn a bunch of other stuff and make a whole CD. And so there's things on the recording that are kind of weak links. And
they're just chosen because they're by that composer or whatever.
Yeah, and it's maybe not that the guitarist is not invested in the music, but they haven't lived with the music in the same way that they have with the pieces that they've been performing in concert.
Right. Yeah.
And it, you know, I spent,
which I guess could also happen with like being commissioned to record a CD of a catalog or something. You know.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly. You don't necessarily have the same amount of time to be able to prepare things all to the same level. And with the Johansson, you know, I spent about a year, I guess, preparing for the recording. I performed everything, you know, several times. I performed the whole set a couple of times. So I think everything was fairly well seasoned by the time I went in to record it. Actually, on a side note, when I did the first recording, the first piece that Steve Goss wrote for me, this sonata, I did a recording for a compilation CD that he was doing, and I really felt that constriction of, you know, I have to get this absolutely right. And I changed the way that I wanted to do some things because I wanted to do what I thought Steve wanted to hear. And he's very happy with the recording, I'm very happy with the recording, but I then did another CD maybe a year later. I performed the piece much more. And because I'd done this first recording, I then felt free to sort of do more like what I wanted to do. And I mean, in truth, probably it would be hard to tell the two recordings apart, but I feel like the second one, for me, my sense is that it's much freer, much more musical, because I had kind of taken that restriction away. Like, you know, I have to get this right. And I felt a little bit more like, okay, I can sort of take a chance here, or I can do something. And I think, you know, maybe that's something that we struggle with all the time as musicians. I have a desire when I play music to play it absolutely right. The definition of right, you know, will change from time to time, but I really, you know, I'm always trying to zero in on the musical truth of a piece. And when you make a recording, obviously you have to stick your sword in the ground and say, this is
where it is.
Yeah, and so to a certain extent, you know, I listen back to some of the recordings that I've done, and I would do them differently now. I don't think, you know, I don't have anything that I'm embarrassed by. But some of the things like, maybe I should have done better or different, right? But I think that's inevitable. I mean, I hope that's inevitable, right? If we're always growing as human beings, we can listen back to stuff we've done in the past and hear how we might do it differently, how it might be better.
One of your your most recent CD was all Spanish music, right? So how did you approach that with repertoire that's so associated with the guitar, and what's the story behind that CD and how you pick the pieces? Because there's so much to choose from there, you know?
Yeah.
And there's so much to choose from that may never have been heard, but there's also so much to choose from that's recognizable and people want to hear.
Yeah.
You know,
So for a long time, I tried to program pieces that other people didn't program, you know, for a couple of reasons. One, to expose an audience to music that they were not familiar with, to find music that could be more specifically associated with me, you know, just to have kind of a unique or a more individual character or reputation, if you will. And so I avoided playing a lot of things like Albans. And then I started to feel, you know what, I kind of want to hear this, I want to play this music because I really love it. And I know that a lot of the people who come and listen to me play, they really want to hear it, so maybe I should just do it anyway. So I sort of, that also came out of my little dalliance with transcription. Another reason that I hadn't played some of those pieces, I'd worked on them with students, but I was not satisfied with transcriptions arrangements for one reason or another. So I thought, okay, well maybe I can try to do my own and find a way for it to be satisfying. So So I started playing some of that music. Then I made this connection with an American luthier, Freddie Shepard, who set up a performance program in Spain on the Camino de Santiago. So he has a program where he invites guitarists every summer, and we play concerts in churches along the Camino for pilgrims. And he likes people to play a lot of Spanish music. So this was an opportunity for me to go back and play a lot of the music that I really loved, but maybe didn't want to play in concert in my sort of professional life. This was something slightly different. So it got me back into playing music, some music that I played years ago, some music that I had just worked on with students and always loved. So that was really a CD of music that I just really wanted to play, rather than, here I am making some sort of personality statement that was perhaps a motivation for the way I chose repertoire and recordings in the past. And I just, I'm very happy with the CD. I had also, spending time in Spain, I think helped me play that music better. Just being around the culture and the language and the places, going back to this sort of stylistic thing, I think I got a better sense for how to play some of that music, delving into the history and the tradition of Spanish classical composition, and Catalan, I should say. There's some Catalan music on there. So yeah, that was sort of a little bit mildly self-indulgent, I guess, but at the same time I knew it's my most popular CD. It certainly is the one that has the broadest appeal, and I realistically have no objection to that.
What advice do you have for young players or young artists, in general, or specifically to do with developing this musical ability to understand these musical languages, and performing and building their own development in their career and that kind of thing? Practice, yeah.
It's tough. I think, the philosophy that if you just do really good work, it will be satisfying. I'd like to believe that if you just keep doing good work, eventually you'll be recognized for it. That's possibly a naive view, but I think at the heart of it, I think there's a great deal of truth to that. Having great reverence and respect for our art, which means having that respect for the different styles and periods of music, trying to do the best possible job, becoming as invested as you can, I think means that you will get the most satisfaction from it. If you're getting the most satisfaction from it, there's a greater likelihood that you'll be able to give satisfaction to other people. And having a plan is good, but also being willing and able to change that plan. I always felt like I had a career plan, a trajectory, although it was not a conscious one at some point. But it also always changed. I'm only going to play 20th century music.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I kind of dig Renaissance music, so maybe I'll play Renaissance music too.
Yeah.
Okay, don't like transcriptions, but maybe I'll do this transcription, right?
Yeah.
So, it's like I always had a 5-year business plan, but I never finished any of them.
Yeah. You always
they changed by year 2 or 3.
Yeah.
And I think that's okay as long as you're focused, and as long as you if something happens that seems to be a divergence, it's not that you shouldn't do it, but you just have to consider what it means. If something completely different had come along, come and play bass in a rock band on a world tour, that would have been a harder choice to make.
Yeah.
But just play some Baroque music, that's not really a big deal.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that the main thing is the dedication and the level of satisfaction. If it's satisfying to you, it'll be satisfying to other people, and I think that will, your reputation will grow. You obviously have to be out there so that people can hear you, and playing in competitions and things like that is a very useful way to develop that. Helps you develop your skill, helps you raise your levels, allows other people to hear you in a certain context. Winning a competition is a nice thing, but it's also not the most important thing and certainly not the only thing that you can get out of competing.
Mhm.
But yeah, playing for people, I do a lot of outreach. I play in high schools, I play in retirement communities,
Mhm.
and you know that's good for you because you get a lot of performance experience. But it's also very good for the people because they get to hear music in a way that they either would not or perhaps could not otherwise do it. So there are ways that you can, you know, get yourself out there, get yourself playing, get yourself heard, get the experience. You know, sitting at home waiting for the phone to ring for the big invitation. You know, if you do that, chances are the phone's not going to ring.
Mhm.
So you know, being self-actuating, I think is very, very important. And understanding that if you're going to become a guitarist, certainly if not any kind of musician, you know, you have to be entrepreneurial in the way that you approach it. You have to be able to live with the highs and the lows and, you know, uncertainty and all of those kinds of things. And those can be a challenge, but at the heart of it, you know, it's about the music, and the more that you make it about the music, I think the easier it is, the more clear your goals become. I would like to believe that everything else will follow.
Mhm.
You know, to a certain extent, you can make your own luck by following the right principles.
Mhm. Good. I think we only have time for one more question. One last question. What does it mean to you to be an artist or someone who creates something?
I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, I guess I don't know if I consider myself an artist. I don't know. You know, I'm an entertainer on some level. I'm an educator on some level. I mean, I would defend the fact that what we do is, as interpreters of music, is an art in the same way that acting is an art. But I also tend to associate the term artist with something that's more creative, like composing or painting or sculpting. And in that regard, I feel very much like I'm not a creator.
Mhm.
So, is that an answer?
Yes. That's
I
good.
guess that's pretty close.
That's pretty close. Yeah.
That's an interesting question. I guess I don't really know how to answer that. I guess I don't think of myself as an artist. I think of myself as somebody who's involved in the arts and is a practicer of the arts.
Mhm.
But I guess for me, it's the definition of artist. So I see myself as, I'm an entertainer and an educator. I'm an educator in terms of just having a student one-on-one or teaching a class, but also whenever I play music for people, I think I'm educating them in music. You know, often you're introducing them to music that they've never heard, or styles or periods of music that they've never heard. So you're broadening people's horizons. You're opening them up to possibilities. You're giving them the opportunity for self-reflection. You know, all of those things. So it's, you know, it's more like I'm I don't know what the word is. Helper, educator, entertainer.
Mhm. All those roles together.
Yeah, all those roles together.
Yeah.
Yeah. And while like I say, I don't feel like it's a creative thing necessarily, but that kind of stymied me in that question.
That's all right. That was a good
Sorry.
answer. And just to finish off, what's next for you? You're teaching at the University of Washington.
Yeah.
And that's going to continue to have a healthy studio there.
Yeah.
What else is next in terms of recording or performing or?
Well, I have a new recording that will hopefully be coming out very soon. It's all done. It's all 19th century music on a period instrument, which is another aspect of that music. I think it sounds best on the period instrument. Sounds good on a modern guitar, but on a period instrument, it just gives it a better perspective. I have some traveling coming up. I'm going to England in March for some concerts. I have go back to Spain in the summer, teaching at guitar in New Mexico, concerts here and there, just continuing to do whatever work it is that I do.
Cool. Nice.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk
Sure.
with me and come to Vancouver and teach us at UBC.
Yeah, that's been great.
Contribute here in Western Canada. So
Yeah, good.
thanks, Mike.
Sure. Thank you.
Thanks.